The words ashes to ashes, dust to dust are commonly used in Christian burials to show the natural cycle that we are born from the earth and we return to the earth. But in modern times, this isn't actually true most of the time. Death, dying, and burial isn't natural. Our dead are pumped with chemicals to slow the process of decay so that we can look good at our wake. 800,000 gallons of formaldehyde are put into the ground every year in the United States, along with the dead, making that land a toxic waste dump that can't be used for any other purpose. Keeping the cemetery lawn pristine and beautiful requires a lot of chemical pesticides and herbicides that harms the wildlife and bees and can leach into the ground afterwards. People are becoming wiser to this and are looking for natural alternatives, and that's the focus of our podcast today. I'll be talking to Elizabeth Fournier, the funeral director of Cornerstone Funeral Services, which is Portland, Oregon's first green funeral home. She's the author of Green Burial Guidebook and her autobiography, Green Reaper. She's a committee member of the Global Green Burial Alliance, and she will be taking us on a tour through the world of green funerals. But first, let us give gratitude to our ancestors and the elements. I acknowledge and thank the element of earth for holding us steady, feeding us, and sheltering us all our lives. I acknowledge and thank the element of air for giving us the means to communicate with each other and across the veil. I acknowledge and thank the element of fire for purification and the desire to create. Acknowledge and thank the element of water for our emotions and for helping us to flow with whatever life brings. I thank the plants for being our food, medicine, and teachers. I thank the animals for being our food, clothing, shelter, and teachers. I thank the mineral kingdom for your healing and wisdom. I thank the ancestors for guiding us through life's ups and downs. And thank the spirit helpers for all the ways that they help and heal that are seen and unseen. And I thank all of you for tuning in, supporting the show, and sharing it with others who you can feel benefit from this information. So be sure to subscribe so you get notified when a new show drops. Thanks. And now let's talk to our guest, Elizabeth Fournier. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
I'm thrilled to be asked. Let's talk everything green.
Awesome. So let's start from the beginning. So you have a really interesting journey that you write about in your book, Green Reaper. Can you tell us how you became interested in death and funerals?
I think it found me. As a child, I was just going about my business doing what you do, kick the can and jumping garbage cans with your dirt bike, the usual. And all of a sudden, I had a parent die. I was super young. And then within a very short period of time, the grandparents who lived with us also died. So three Fourniers in a very short period of time. And I became this real wacky, weird kid at school because who has all these Fourniers in caskets who I was at a Catholic school, so the priest was always coming to the house, and there was always a rosary, there was always a mass, there was always prayers, and I got a lot of attention for being this kid, this poor kid that had all these issues. So, as time went on, people would come to me and they would want to talk about their dog that passed away or grandma that passed away. And I kind of became this go to resource for people who had lost somebody. I was doing the burials for people's cats in the neighborhoods. And I just knew about age 13 that some sort of undertaking, some sort of funeral arts was definitely going to be in my future because my path that I was walking was definitely way different than the other girls I knew.
For sure. And can you share some of your stories from your summer job as a teen when you worked was it the night cemetery caretaker?
Yeah. It's kind of a funky name, but I was sort of the live-in caretaker. And I thought, oh, this sounds glamorous. I'll be living in this funeral home in the hills, the rolling hills of Portland, and I will just be, walking through the grass barefoot and arranging tulips. I had no idea what the heck I was in for. So I was living in this small little trailer at the far recesses of a very hot, hot summer cemetery. And my job was to be the night person. So I would open the gate if somebody came to drop off a loved one. My job was to drive through in the evening and lock up the bathrooms in the mausoleum. And if somebody was drinking, I had to go as a young person and say, "Excuse me, we're closed now. And,
Wow.
I don't know what it is about a cemetery on a rolling hill in Portland on summer nights, but it's where everybody wants to go party. So people started learning, oh gosh, I think there's somebody who lives here. So pretty soon people were creeching around my trailer and I had a shotgun under my bed. And,
Oh
you
my
know,
God.
it was the scariest summer of my life, but I lived through it. And I'm really glad my first foray was so hairy because it made the rest of my 34 years now, a lot lighter.
So it sounds like the scariest thing about that were the people, not
Yeah.
spooks or
It was the living, working the
okay.
evenings, visitations in the funeral home or cleaning up, what have you. That was fine. Being in the funeral home was a nice experience, but it was once I left and I went back to my trailer, who knows who'd be peeking in my window
Oh
while I was
wow.
watching, reruns of whatever on TV. That wasn't fun.
So how did you go from that to doing green funerals?
So time had gone where I got jobs in standard funeral parlors, doing standard funeral parlor stuff. And about 10 years or so of doing that, I realized, this isn't really feeding my soul. This isn't really what I thought it was. Mostly when you work as a funeral director in a lot of corporate funeral homes, you're technically a salesperson.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh man, my childhood fantasy, my immature thought of I'd be invisibly holding people's hands and I'd be ushering them through this process and it would be this beautiful experience. We were having sales meetings and I was upselling caskets and I was giving these presentations to people who were in deep grief. And one day I walked through the cemetery, barefoot, of course, and I said, okay, okay. I offered up prayers and I said, if I'm meant to be in this industry, if this is meant to be my calling, if I'm supposed to be here, please open a door for me. This is not, this just doesn't it. This isn't what I want. In a very short period of time, I received a call from a friend of a friend who knew of a friend that had a tiny funeral home in this tiny town of Boring, Oregon, and he needed someone to run the place. And my first thought was, holy crap, Boring, Oregon. My gosh, that's, way out towards the mountains. That's nowhere near Portland, Oregon, where I'm a city person. That's country. That's, oh my goodness, what is that? So I thought, let's just check it out. So I was led to get in the car, and one beautiful Saturday morning, I drove out and as I drove along the beautiful Clackamas River, and I saw geese and I saw goats. And as I got near the property, people were waving at me. And I thought, wow, here I am out of the city, but I feel so much more less alone and I feel so much more seen. So I ended up getting the job and working at this little parlor that was going to be condemned. It was in a little repurposed goat barn in the middle of nowhere. And the phone rang maybe, gosh, hardly. And but within the very about a week or so of being here, I got a call from a family who lived in an intentional community and their loved one died and they wanted to keep their loved one on the intentional community. And I was so fascinated and I was so excited. And I had to be really transparent with them and say, wow, I've never done this before, but I want to help you with this. So let me make sure I can do this. I called all these places. I called locally to the city and to the county and to the state and wherever I thought, and nobody really had anything on the books that said you cannot keep somebody at home and you cannot bury somebody on your property. So finally, I got a hold of the county zoning and planning, and they said, well, give us the address. And they said, sure, why not? So there's nothing that says you can't do it. So we had this beautiful ceremony. Wanda, the Wanderer, was laid to rest on her beautiful area right outside her teepee. And the ceremony was lovely. The space was dug. We all stood together on the earth. We just held hands. We talked. We had intentions. We sang. People talked about her kindness. It was shovelfuls of earth into the grave. It was aromatic. It was beautiful. It was thoughtful. We all took our time. And as I drove away that day, I thought to myself, wow, I always thought my calling in the death industry was because I had so many people taken out of my life. And my job was to possibly work in a funeral home. But this day I realized, nope, this was my watershed moment, my Oprah aha moment. This is the one that made me think this is why I'm here to let families know this is something you can do and it's attainable. So I studied all the rules and figured things out and realized in the rural part of my county, we can bury people in their yards. And my phone started ringing.
It's amazing how many people want that if they know that they can have it. And a lot of people don't know. They think I have to be buried in a cemetery. I have to have a casket. I have to have a vault. I have to have all of these things. But a green funeral is really different. So can you talk a little bit about like what what do people ask for when they come in and they're having all these misconceptions about what they have to have?
Well, I think people even think they have to be embalmed before they're
Yeah.
cremated. I think that there's just such a lack of knowledge out there, and people don't always know the questions to ask.
Mhm.
So people will come in and say, I want one of those green burials. And they don't really know what it looks like, what it means. So
Uh-huh.
I say, well, let's work backwards. Let's talk about where you want to do this. And I mentioned the private land option, and there's several counties in my state we can do this, but a lot of families that doesn't work for them. They don't live in the right place.
Mhm.
Someone in the house says, yeah, I don't want to do that. It doesn't feel right. So luckily, there are so many cemeteries in the Portland area, outside the Portland area. I live, I'm 20 miles from a huge metro city. And luckily, out in the country area here in the city, I live in a pretty liberal place. There's a lot of green burial spaces. And I have to say, a lot of those cemeteries opened up to natural burial because I kept calling and saying, my
Mhm.
family would like to come and be laid to rest there. So, anyways, we work on where are you going to have your actual burial. They go, they meet the people, they figure out, they get excited because you stand there on your own grass or you figure out what tree you want mama laid underneath. And then we talk about, well, what sort of container do you want to be in? Do you want a sheet off your bed? Should I get you a shroud? I have a wonderful Vietnam veteran that makes pine caskets. What's comfortable for you? And then we talk about ceremony. Do you want to have your loved one at home? Do you want them here at the parlor? Do you want me just to arrive with them at the cemetery? Do you want to transport them yourself? So we talk about the variables. And when families understand they can do as much as they want or as little as they want, they feel really comfortable with that because some people want a natural burial. They want to keep their person at home. They want to do everything. They want to bathe their person. They want to wrap them in organic fabric. Others say, just come get them and we'll just maybe, see you at the parlor or see you at the cemetery. So it's beautiful because we're all so different and there are just so many options that fit whatever people want.
Now, are there any health conditions or procedures that would make a person ineligible for a green burial? So, for example, if you have a titanium implant or if you've had chemo, can they still be buried in a green cemetery?
I get that question a lot. The thing that we can't bury is we really want a natural body, meaning a body that doesn't have embalming chemicals. Embalming chemicals is formaldehyde and formalin and a lot of other really toxic things, which isn't so good for the water. So people will say, well, yeah, but she had chemotherapy for 10 years. And think about all of that. The beautiful thing about soil, the beautiful thing about our body is things really can neutralize. So, chemotherapy, if you ate at McDonald's every day in your life and you're pickled that way with all of that, your body, the soil, things can really go back to earth and things can dissipate. Even embalming fluid, we're finding out too, can sort of dissipate in the soil as well. So, a titanium piece, a pacemaker, we're not going to remove metal implanted in the body before the burial. Others will say, well, then that's not really a true green burial. Well, we have to work in reality. All of us probably have one tooth with a filling. We probably all have maybe a nail we swallowed as a child or a screw for some sort of surgery. I think it's really rare to find somebody who's lived life on the planet that's unscathed. There might be something. You might also have something possibly synthetic in your clothing. We try to have somebody organic clothing, chemical free, but again, we'll place you in the earth and it is what it is. I've never seen a 100% green burial because people are probably going to go to the cemetery, maybe solo in a car. You know, that's not very carbon friendly. You're probably going to have somebody wearing leather shoes. Someone's probably coming with their single use Starbucks cup. So to have it 100% green, again, this is the world. We live in reality. About as green as you're going to get is if you pass it home, someone carries you from your bed to the backyard, someone hand dug the grave. You are free of anything radical, anything chemical, anything material. You're placed in the grave, and then we all feast on sustainable food out of your garden. That's about 100% green as it's going to get.
Yeah.
And everybody rides their bicycle to your burial.
So, in your opinion, what is the minimum number of acres for a green cemetery to satisfy the growing demand and allow for growth?
If people are going to do this in their yard, for instance, in my great state of Oregon, it's laid out that you have to have at least 1 acre.
Oh,
And then there's some other requirements. You need to be in a rural part of the county. You need to be set back from electric and a watershed. And it's really doable for most people.
okay.
And that's not considered a cemetery because you can't charge money. You can't really advertise that you're a cemetery because then you have to have a license. Then you get into actually establishing a cemetery. Then you have to go to your local ordinances, your local board, and go through all the steps and permitting and all those things. But just to have a burial in your yard, you can do that. You can have your whole family there. You can even name it if you want. But again, you can't say, you know, Peepaw's Green Acres and then have, people pay you to be there. No,
Mhm.
no. It becomes no longer private land burial.
Okay. Okay. So, one of the ways that cemeteries save space is by burying bodies on top of each other. And in a green cemetery, a body that hasn't been embalmed will decompose in about 5 years. So, how long do you wait to recycle that plot and bury another body there? So, and what's the rationale for the limit, for the time limit?
So, America is a very interesting place. We are the only country that says when someone has a grave space, they have that in perpetuity. We
Mm.
don't move people, we don't resell it. We are the only country where someone will have land, they'll have their 10,000 feet space, they'll have their huge tombstone, and it's mine. I'll be dead for generations. It's mine. That's my space. Only place we do that. Other places, there's a limit of so many years. So, what you're really getting at as far as the body breaking down, there's no reason why you couldn't have two loved ones. That's again up to the cemetery, up to how that works out. And then the family would be aware of that. Now, that space would be owned by somebody in the family. There would be a deed in the state and that would only be the family grave. If it wanted to be reopened again and another person placed there, again, it would just depend on if the cemetery has a second right of interment or how that works.
Okay.
Some cemeteries now are creating side by side situations where they can place people because ultimately you want the person to be about 3 feet, 4 feet down. You want the body to touch the earth. You want them and their juicy goodness to really get the party started there with the micro function and the fungi and the spores and all the happenings and not really disturb the space because that body is giving back and the
Mhm.
topsoil and everything, the permaculture and the ecosystem all around them is going to be flourishing and great. So there's really no reason to disturb that space again.
Now, you talked about the decomposition and the fungi and all of that, and I know that there are people who are developing ways to quicken that process. They said, okay, if you get in this mushroom pod, it'll be totally decomposed in 30 days. And I'm just making up that number. I don't know what it is. And things like that, pods. So do you do other types of natural burials, like the innovative stuff like that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's a very important thing to talk about. First off, the mushroom suit. That was established a while back. The woman who made that, Jay Lee Rim, does a wonderful TED Talk, and she is darling, and she's wearing the suit, and it's really interesting. And those had been sold, not widely, but that was definitely, it made quite a splash because it was fascinating to see this funky black suit with these mushroom spores sold into it. Um, they did a test in Austin, Texas about 10 years ago where they had a side by side green burial, one person natural, one person in this mushroom suit. And they had some PVC pipes that went into the ground with a camera and they could check out what happened. Well, unfortunately, the testing came back that the mushroom suit didn't do anything to accelerate
Mm,
anything. So
okay.
that was too bad. Now, Luke Perry, the actor from 90210, that TV show. He died a handful of years ago and he bought one. His children bought that for him. So that became a resurgence. And all of a sudden, this kind of became popular again. But again, person who has green insider knowledge, I've never sold one, I've never seen one. And for someone who's done green burial for 2 decades, that sort of tells you
Mm,
not readily is available.
okay.
People also see these ecopods, these wonderful,
Yeah.
huge pods that go in the ground, and you're placed into it in the fetal position, and it will be this forest of trees. That is called Insula Mundi, and that is actually in Italy. That is an idea that is not come to fruition, but it was so cool that these pods were all over the internet. Again, made a huge advertising. People got excited about that. Those are not available in the US. That is not a legal form of disposition. And
Okay.
the idea of taking an actual body and putting it into a fetal position and putting it inside this pod, it's not overly realistic without probably, doing something to the body, which most funeral directors don't want to do. So
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know. That's neat. I love it. I love the innovation. I love the ideas, but that is not something that is happening in the United States.
Okay. Well, we do have some innovation in caskets and things like that with the bamboo caskets. And can you talk a little bit about that or the shrouds?
Absolutely. So you can be buried, like I said, with fabric, with a sheet from the bed. You can be in bamboo or willow or seagrass or natural pine, all of these wonderful, wonderful containers, big, huge bamboo leaves. You really can make something out. What we want to do is put something in the ground which is fully biodegradable.
Hmm.
That's the big deal. We don't really want to put caskets in the ground that are shellacked with sprays that are bad for the Environmental Protection Agency said, ooh, these are pretty bad and these will contaminate groundwater and these get into the air. Also, metal. We don't really want to put that in the ground because that's not really going to biodegrade. It's just going to break down and be bad properties. And then there's the idea of why do we need to spend a lot of money on an elaborate box that's going to do nothing but sit there? Now, I understand the funeral industry back in the 80s, even the 90s, started that campaign with it's the last thing you can do for someone you love. So get them the big tombstone and get them that expensive, fancy hardware casket because this is your expression of love. It's their rite of passage, just like the wedding dress, right? Get them that casket. There were a lot of models being called things like the Chrysler and the Monticello and all these names that were status. And that became a lot of a thing that went on in the industry, spend money. And that's where the upselling and that's where the ugliness came, where people started realizing funeral directors are really used car salespeople because it's really the bigger, the better, the more expensive. And I'm really glad we've come back to what we did 150 years ago, which is the simplicity, which is the treading lightly on the earth, which is the giving back, and ultimately going green, really, literally giving yourself back to the earth is the ultimate going green we can think of.
Hmm. So can you talk a little bit about the cost differences in a green funeral versus a traditional funeral?
I guess it really depends because you're buying land at a cemetery And cemeteries are going to price graves according to the view. And I realize the deceased person is not enjoying the view of the mountain every day. But if there's a view, if it's a park-like setting, just depending on the upkeep, if they have the sparkling green grass, cemeteries price things as they want. You can buy a green grave at a really small cemetery for a very inexpensive price, or you can actually go to a larger, more corporate cemetery where they have green burial and they have more of a hybrid. There's a lot of large, beautiful cemeteries with the grass that gets mowed and all of the chemicals on the grass to make it green and sparkly, but they'll allow you to be buried in the grave without a grave liner. And what that means is a green burial is technically a natural body in a natural container in a natural space. A lot of these big cemeteries want you to have this grave liner or this grave box made out of concrete so the grass doesn't get that wavy, gravy look. It's nice and smooth. It's sexy. It's a memorial park. It looks all uniform. Then they can allegedly, sell more graves because it looks very tidy and neat. So if you bought something at a smaller cemetery and you bought a less expensive casket or you used your favorite fabric or you had some sort of natural woven cloak or something, you could be potentially saving a lot of money. The
Mhm.
price breakdown is tricky because you could buy a very elaborate shroud, which is made of the most pure silk and it has
Mhm.
all this decorative stuff, and you could spend thousands of dollars on that and still have a natural burial. Or you can decide that, nope, the local artisan down the street that's going to make you a simple pine box for $500 is good enough for you, and then you can save. The nice thing about green burial is you can save a lot because you're not paying for the embalming. You don't have to
Mhm.
pay for a grave liner. And then you can do other things yourself too, like provide your own transportation, depending on, of course, what state you're in. But people are learning they can bathe their person at home or
Yeah.
dress their person at home. And funeral homes, this is a trick that people don't understand, but there are 41 states that say you can act as your own funeral director. You
Mhm.
don't have to hire a funeral home to do things. And that's pretty impressive. And people don't realize that. I happen to be in the state of Oregon and I don't have to have my families choose me. So when people call and say, how can I have the least expensive burial? How can I do this? Then we talk about, well, would you like to get the doctor to sign a death certificate? Would you like to actually go and sit and hand it? Would you like to pick your person up from the hospital or nursing home and bring them home? I mean, all of these options that are mind blowing to people. So
Mhm.
I like to do presentations at libraries and community centers and churches to give people the options because, like you're asking, what's the price difference? It can be considerable if you know how to make correct choices.
Mhm. Mhm. So, taking care of the dead is the sacred trust, as you elaborate. And I can see that you feel that way in everything that you're talking about. And it's the deceased's last touch with this world as they transition to the other world. And you also, like you said, have to take care of the family who's also probably in a fragile state. And it must be really fulfilling to be in that business. So, what are the most frequent compliments that friends and family have to share with you after having a green burial?
That's a lovely, lovely, lovely question. I find a lot that the cemetery worker, the funeral worker were sort of invisible in the process a lot.
Hmm.
And it is really the worst time for a family. So sometimes you are invisible. A lot of cemetery workers will say, wow, I dug this grave. I knew about this
Hmm.
person. I stood there. I heard all the tributes. I helped them with things. I lowered their person. I put the soil back on, and no one makes eye contact with me or no one says thank you. And I know
Yeah.
that there's a lot of depression with grave diggers because they're kind of considered like this coal stoker or this lonely, lowly person who just is there in the corner with a shovel. Um, Funeral wise, I tend to get all of the mismanaged expectations. So that's one, hardship of it. But on the other hand, the compliments tend to be, and the ones I like the most is, You've made this so easy on us.
Mm,
I mean, how beautiful to hear that. When someone says, I was really scared to come into the funeral home, but you opened the door and I saw this smiley face and I realized it was going to be okay.
mm,
Um, Even as a child, my thought, even as I was on the sandbox trying to comprehend my mom dying and my grandparents dying, and I had these little graves and I dug them in the sand and my brother's Hot Wheel cars, and I was trying to impress my Barbies with this funeral and do this whole thing. Even then, it was the thought of sort of invisibly holding somebody's hand through the
yeah.
process versus the preparing the body and showing up in my black dress. And it was really that idea of, wow, helping somebody, letting them know they're not alone. And I've been in their shoes before, and ultimately everybody gets a turn. So when people do stop and say, you made this easier, or thank you, or people will say, you're in my phone, or, I don't do any advertising here at the parlor. Most people who call me will say, so and so told me to call you, or I was at the service for so and so,
Mhm,
and you seem like a nice person. And gosh, that really means so much. That means just so much.
mhm. I love that more people are talking openly about death and participating in it. I think it leads to a more awakened life. And I thank you for being a part of that awakening with your podcast, your funeral home, and your books. So, how can people get in touch with you, Elizabeth, if they want to know more?
Oh, thank you. Well, it's great people like you who see the importance in this and have me share. So I appreciate that. And thank you for your work and what you're doing. I have a website called thegreenreaper.org, and my three books are on that website. If somebody is interested in the book, I highly recommend you go to the library and check it out. You definitely don't need to buy a new book and use a tree to have reading material. We can do things electronically, we can do things used, we can also check things out from the library. It's a wonderful way to do that. I'm on Instagram at Elizabeth Green Reaper, and I document a lot of the green burial things I'm doing. And I have a lot of information on there of how to make your own shroud and how to build a casket. And this is what it looks like when somebody transports somebody, and just sort of the day in, day out things at the parlor. I've been able to create things, makeup with berries and olive oil, and I show some of those things too. So just happy to give information away because really we are just all in this together. And Ram Dass has this wonderful quote: "We all are just walking each other home." Isn't that beautiful?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for sharing your life with us. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you. You have a blessed and beautiful day.